Do you know someone, or have you ever met someone who thinks they can do whatever they want without caring about anyone else? Well, today I'm going to tell you a true story that has a very powerful lesson. Imagine a rich woman, full of money, living as if she's untouchable, not caring about anyone. She thinks she can do anything. But then she crossed paths with a judge who wasn't going to let it slide. And what happened after changed everything. Not just for her, but for everyone in that courtroom. Now tell me, where are you watching this video from? I bet this story is going to make you see things in a whole new way. Curious? Stick with me, because you'll be surprised by the ending. The courtroom was packed, a bunch of people whispering softly while waiting for the hearing to start. It was just another normal day in a New York courtroom, but with one difference. Everyone was eager to see what would happen to Chloe Hamilton. Who was this Chloe? Let me tell you. She was a super famous influencer online, always doing whatever she wanted without thinking about the consequences. You know that person who thinks they're above everything? That was her. And there she was, Chloe, walking into the courtroom like she was on a runway. She was late, of course, and didn't seem to care at all. Wearing expensive clothes and giant sunglasses like a Hollywood star. When she walked in, everyone stared because, let's face it, it was impossible not to notice. She strolled down the aisle slowly, acting like time was hers to waste. She even told her lawyer to move so she could put her purse on the seat. It was like she thought the whole courtroom was just a stage for her. But then Judge James Miller walked in, and when he did, the whole vibe in the room shifted. The chatter stopped, and everyone went silent. Judge Miller was known for being fair but also very serious. He was tall, had a strong gaze, and knew how to command respect without shouting. When he entered, everyone stood up except Chloe, who stayed seated, huffing, like she was wasting her time. After a deep sigh, she stood up, clearly not wanting to be there. But Judge Miller, unaffected, adjusted his glasses and began the hearing. I had the feeling something big was about to happen. Chloe had racked up a ton of parking tickets and, even worse, she had been driving recklessly, putting a pedestrian at risk. It seemed like the session would be smooth, but Chloe didn't want it to be. As soon as the judge started talking about the charges, she slouched in her chair, crossed her arms, rolled her eyes, and made it clear she thought it was all a joke. The most impressive part? Judge Miller didn't let it faze him. He continued with his calm and controlled voice like he was saying, "I know exactly where this is headed." The tension in the room grew, but Chloe seemed to be ignoring it all. She kept tapping her nails on the table, ignoring her lawyer's whispers who was trying to get her to stop. When the judge asked her to confirm her identity, Chloe didn't even look up. She responded coldly and uninterested. "Yeah, that's me." It was so disrespectful that everyone in the room exchanged glances, except for Judge Miller. He did nothing. He just stared at her for a moment as if calculating what to say next. "Chloe," he began, his voice firm but not raised, "in this courtroom, everyone must show respect. I suggest you adjust your attitude." And what did Chloe do? She laughed as if it were a joke. Still slouched in her chair, she started playing with her hair and responded sarcastically, "Sure, Your Honor, obviously." The silence in the room was complete. Even the court reporter stopped typing, while her lawyer buried his face in his hands, embarrassed. But Judge Miller didn't lose his composure. He repeated, now more seriously, "Chloe, do you understand the charges against you today?" Chloe rolled her eyes, and with an exaggerated sigh she replied, "Look, honestly, no, it's just some tickets, and I don't know. Someone got scared because I sped up a little. This is a waste of time." The silence in the room grew even heavier. Everyone was waiting for the judge's reaction. He then closed his file, placed his glasses on the bench beside him, and with a piercing gaze said, "Chloe, I hope you choose your words more carefully from now on." His tone was so serious that even the most distracted people in the room straightened up, but Chloe, still thinking she was in some sort of show, shrugged and said, "Yeah, I didn't hurt anyone. This is ridiculous." Little did she know, the judge's silence spoke volumes. The air was tense as if everyone were holding their breath. Judge Miller, unhurried, looked at her and said calmly, "I see. Let me explain something to you, Chloe. The charges against you aren't just for reckless driving. What you did was put someone's life at risk. The law doesn't measure crime by size, but by the impact it has. Do you understand that? And what did Chloe do? She rolled her eyes again and responded with complete disdain. Sure, whatever you say. For a moment, the judge stayed silent, but something in his eyes shifted. He paused, and it felt like time had stopped, until he asked, "Do you remember what happened 2 weeks ago? That incident that brought you here today?" Chloe let out a sigh as if she were extremely bored. I don't know. Some guy popped up in front of me out of nowhere. I honked. He moved, and that was it. The judge raised an eyebrow and repeated, "Is that all? Is that what you think?" She responded, crossing her arms, already with a look on her face like she wanted to end this. Nothing big. He didn't get hurt. Nobody got hurt. Was then that the judge picked up a paper and started reading it calmly. And when he spoke, his voice made everyone sit up straight as if the entire room felt the weight of those words. "Let me register," the judge said. "The pedestrian you almost hit, Mr. William Carter, is a 67-year-old retired teacher. He was crossing the street properly when you accelerated toward him, causing him to stumble and break his wrist." At that moment, Chloe's confident smile faltered, but she still tried to hold her composure. She looked at her lawyer, who whispered hurriedly, but she pretended not to hear and responded, "I didn't hit him, he was fine." The judge set the papers aside and looked at her firmly. The air in the room grew heavy, and it was clear that this was far from over. He continued reading, but what he said next made Chloe's expression change. He explained that Mr. Carter was still in pain and needed medical attention after the incident. For the first time, Chloe looked at her lawyer, who tried to speak quietly to her, but as always she ignored him and responded in a quieter voice, "I didn't hit him. He was fine." The judge, keeping his calm, said, "Chloe, this sounds like you think there was no harm done." Before she could speak, he continued, making it clear that the issue wasn't just the charges, but her failure to recognize the impact her actions had. He spoke in a calm voice, but with each word it felt like he was adding more weight to her. "What concerns me, Chloe, is not just the severity of the charges, but the fact that you can't see the impact of your choices." Chloe tried to slouch in her chair, pretending it didn't affect her, but the tension in the room was becoming too much for her to ignore. Her tone of disdain started to fade. "Look, I already said it. I didn't hurt anyone. Everyone's being so dramatic nowadays," she replied, visibly irritated. The judge, unhurried, placed the pen on the table and with a penetrating look said, "Then why don't we hear directly from Mr. Carter, who's here in the courtroom?" The tension in the room rose even more. Chloe glanced at the audience, and for the first time she seemed nervous. There in the second row was Mr. Carter, with his arm in a sling. He wasn't angry, but the disappointment in his gaze seemed stronger than any anger. Chloe took a quick glance and, uncomfortable, muttered, "I'm sure he's fine." The judge leaned forward and firmly said, "Chloe, your refusal to see this person's pain speaks volumes about who you are. But the problem here isn't just him. What we're dealing with is the kind of mindset people like you have when you believe you're above everything." The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the sound of the stenographer's pen seemed amplified. All eyes were on the judge, waiting to hear what he would say next. He, with the same calm demeanor, said, "Since you seem not to care about the consequences of your actions, maybe it's time for you to truly feel them." Chloe gave a slight shudder, and for the first time, it seemed like things were getting serious for her. "What does that mean?" she asked, now in a weaker tone. The judge didn't respond immediately. He gestured to the court officer, who brought over a stack of papers. The judge began to read, detailing everything Chloe would have to pay: fines, community service hours, and an empathy course. But what really caught everyone by surprise was what he said next. "I've reviewed everything carefully," he said. "Given the seriousness of your actions and the disrespect you've shown, I'm giving you a sentence that not only resolves the legal matter, but also gives you a perspective you desperately need." Chloe, who had been relaxed in her chair, now sat up straight, and for the first time her confidence was replaced with unease. "Perspective," she repeated in disbelief. "Yes, the judge answered calmly. "In addition to the fines and 280 hours of community service, you will spend the next 40 days volunteering at a women's shelter downtown. There you will work with people facing real challenges, without judgment. Maybe this will help you understand what responsibility is and the impact your actions have on others." When he finished speaking, a murmur spread across the room. No one expected something like this. Some supported it, others were shocked. But the most intense reaction came from Chloe. "Are you kidding me?" she exclaimed, raising her voice. "You want me to work with homeless people? This has nothing to do with me." The judge, unmoved, responded with even more coldness. "Chloe, it's exactly that mindset that brought you here. Your actions show that you don't understand how your choices affect others. This is a chance for growth, and to make it clear, if you don't comply, the punishment will be much harsher." Chloe's lawyer tugged at her sleeve, trying to calm her down, but she pulled away sharply. "This is ridiculous," she protested. "You can't force me to do this." Judge Miller, without losing his composure, raised his hand and, with a gesture, silenced the entire room. "You will complete the community service, yes. You will report to the shelter at 8 a.m. every day. Your supervisor will send weekly reports on your progress. And if you choose not to cooperate, we'll meet again here, but under much worse conditions." The atmosphere in the room was tense. Chloe was clearly upset, but for the first time she was quiet. She seemed at a loss for words, as if they had failed her. The judge had already delivered his sentence, and there was nothing more to discuss. The silence in the room was heavy, as if everyone present knew that what was happening wasn't just a punishment, but a lesson Chloe could no longer ignore. The tension built up, and Chloe, still red with anger, stayed silent. For the first time, she didn't argue back. She sat there, completely stunned, not knowing how to react. The judge wasn't done. He calmly adjusted his glasses and let the silence linger, as if he wanted everyone to feel the weight of what he was about to say. Then he spoke again, but this time his voice was softer, almost human. "Chloe," he said, "this court is not here to humiliate or belittle you. We're here to ensure justice and, when possible, to teach. Your privilege has shielded you from many consequences, and it's cost you something very valuable: the ability to feel empathy. This isn't about punishing you, it's about helping you regain your humanity." The whole room seemed to hold its breath, as if they were waiting for what would happen next. Chloe, now more uncomfortable than ever, looked to the gallery. She could feel her confidence crumbling. She tried to speak, but the words didn't come out. That's when the judge asked in a gentler tone, as if he were conversing with her, "Do you know what Mr. Carter said when we asked how he felt about you?" Chloe shook her head, glancing briefly at Mr. Carter, who was in the gallery. He wasn't angry, but there was a quiet disappointment on his face. The judge paused, then continued, "He doesn't want you to suffer. He just wants you to understand. Because if you don't understand, you'll keep hurting people, and one day you'll do something you won't be able to fix." Mr. Carter's words landed like a heavy weight. Chloe went pale, and her demeanor completely faltered. For the first time, she looked more than uncomfortable. She even seemed guilty. But the judge didn't stop there. He looked at her directly, firmly, and said, "Mr. Carter, whom you nearly injured, chose compassion over anger. He could have asked for a much harsher punishment, but instead he asked for a chance for you to learn. And that's what this sentence is trying to provide you." Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her chair, as if her confidence had evaporated. The silence was so intense that even the slightest sound seemed to echo. She knew, and everyone in that room knew, that this moment wasn't just about justice. It was about a chance for change that she couldn't ignore. Judge Miller looked at Chloe one last time before finishing the hearing. "On Monday, you will begin your work at the women's shelter downtown. There you'll meet women who've been through things you can't even imagine. Some have lost everything, others are rebuilding their lives. You'll hear their stories, and maybe, just maybe, you'll start to understand the value of humility and responsibility." Chloe seemed like she wanted to protest, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the weight of the situation or the judge's stern gaze. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, clearly signaling for silence. Chloe said nothing, but the tension was palpable in the air. With a sharp sound, the judge slammed the gavel. "This court is adjourned," he announced, standing up and leaving the room with the posture of someone who knew they had just done something important. But the atmosphere in the room still felt heavy, as if a storm had passed, leaving its marks. Chloe sat there in disbelief at what she had just heard. Her face was a mix of anger and surprise. The lawyer tried to speak to her, whispering something hurriedly, but she was so absorbed in what had just happened that she barely heard. The room emptied out, and murmurs began to grow. People were commenting on what they had just witnessed. For many, it felt more like a lesson than a simple sentence. Mr. Carter slowly got up, with his arm in a sling, still a living reminder of what had happened. When he passed by Chloe, he gave her a calm, gentle but firm look. She, however, looked away, staring fixedly at the table in front of her. Outside, the press was already waiting. Reporters surrounded the exit, cameras flashed, and questions came non-stop. Chloe's name, once associated with parties and scandals, was now tied to that tense moment in the courtroom. "Chloe, do you have any comments about today's sentence? Do you think it was fair? What do you think of Judge Miller's words?" For a moment, Chloe's arrogance returned. She lifted her chin and responded, full of disdain. "No comment." She pushed her way through the crowd and got into the car waiting for her. But as soon as the doors closed and the flashes from the cameras faded, she finally let her facade drop. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time it seemed like reality was starting to sink in. That night, the story was all over the news. Judge Miller's words and the drama in the courtroom spread across social media. Opinions were divided about the sentence, but the most memorable comment came from Mr. Carter, who in a brief statement said, "I don't want her to talk. I just hope she learns, because when we stop learning, we stop growing. And that's when we truly lose." These simple and sincere words resonated far beyond the courtroom, touching even those who weren't present. For Chloe, that was just the beginning of a transformation she couldn't yet understand. On Monday, she arrived at the women's shelter in downtown. The cold seemed harsher than she had imagined, and the surroundings, simple and distant from the luxuries she was used to, made her feel completely out of place. Volunteers and staff moved quickly, while the sounds of laughter and utensils mixed within the building. For the first time in a long time, Chloe felt like a stranger. As Chloe entered, she was immediately greeted by a mix of voices and the sound of pots clanging in the kitchen. Before she could process what was happening, a woman in her 40s with a firm smile approached her. "You must be Chloe," she said. "Welcome, let's get started." And that's where her first day of fulfilling her sentence began. Chloe was assigned to help prepare meals, serve food, and clean up afterward. At first, she barely spoke, staying silent, looking down, trying to avoid eye contact. Her confidence, which always accompanied her, seemed to have stayed outside this place. But as the day went on, something started to change. Chloe began to notice things she had never paid attention to before: the grateful smiles of people receiving food, the way the volunteers helped each other despite the many struggles, and most importantly, the stories. During lunch, a single mother of 3 children started talking to Chloe. The woman spoke with a strong voice, but her words were filled with years of struggle. "You think you understand everything?" she said, looking directly at Chloe. "But life has a way of teaching you what really matters." Chloe stayed silent, listening intently, absorbing those words in a way she had never done before. When she drove home that night, Chloe was strangely quiet. The people she had met, their stories, and even Judge Miller's words kept echoing in her head. For the first time, she began to wonder if there was more to life than the world she had created for herself. A world of privilege, isolation, and appearance. Weeks passed, and Chloe spent more days at the shelter. Over time, she began to listen more than talk. Slowly, without even realizing it, she started to change. Those walls she had built around herself began to crumble. When she finally completed her sentence, Chloe returned to the courthouse to say goodbye to Judge Miller. But this time she was a different person, calmer, more reflective, and most importantly, grateful. "Thank you," she said with a firm but sincere voice, "for not giving up on me." Judge Miller nodded with a small smile on his face, as if he was pleased with what he saw. "The real thanks will come," he replied, "when you take everything you've learned and use it to make a difference." When Chloe left the courthouse, she felt the sun shining brighter than ever. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small but very powerful hope. It was a chance to start over, to rebuild her life and her worldview. Chloe's journey became a reminder to everyone. Change is possible, but it requires humility, courage, and the willingness to face one's own flaws. And now I ask you, what will you do today to open your heart and learn from the lessons life has to offer? If this story touched you, share in the comments what lessons you've taken from it and subscribe for more stories that inspire us to grow and change.